There we go. All right. Cool. You guys should be able to see my screen, but just in case, let's get I guess a confirmation. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yeah, we can see it.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right. Awesome. Well, guys, welcome to week 5. We have got a lot on the agenda today and some pretty good stuff. This is where we really start getting into some of the actual structure of building web pages. This week's subject, really, there's 2 subjects that I want to tackle with you guys this week. I want to talk about working with grid systems in HTML and CSS. And that's really going to be very much sort of tied into introducing to you guys what's referred to as the box model for HTML and CSS. It's essentially how we create grids or layouts to ultimately put things into. You know, I mean, up until now, you guys have started to work with some basics of like text, for example. That very much is like what you were working with over the course of this last week when you guys were putting together your style guide, as well as like the Code Academy demos that you guys completed. But that stuff, in reality, actually will go into containers, into a grid, so that we can start to place it around, you know, an actual web page. And that's what we get into this week. We're going to do that really in 2 parts. First, via an assignment that I'm going to give you guys. I'll talk about that briefly, but I did actually put together a walkthrough on that, very similarly to how I put together the walkthrough for your style guide. The second thing that I want to talk about with you guys today is an introduction to hyperlinks in HTML. And this is going to be a conversation that I'm going to break up over the course of 2 weeks with you guys. I introduce it today because it's part of the next portion of our project 1. So I want to give you guys a basic understanding of it. But I'm going to continue talking about it next week when we actually start making some of the additional subpages for your project. This week is more about kind of getting it in place, putting it in navigation, but I'll really talk about like the functionality of it a little bit more next week. And you'll kind of see the method behind my madness in terms of why I'm starting to introduce it to you guys today. It'll make a lot more sense when we actually generate those subsequent subpages, and then they actually will link together. So that's sort of the game plan for this week. Let me kind of, before we dig into some of the specifics, let me show you what I've got set up here in week 5 in the D2L class for you guys. The first is the next like coding demo for you guys. This is to introduce the box model. It's going to very much piggyback on what we're going to talk about here today. So there's 2 components to this. There is a spec sheet, which I will open up here for you guys. There's also a walkthrough demo, which I put together, which basically it guides you through the process of coding 2 of the 4 pages in that spec sheet. Okay, and that's just a link to a video I posted on YouTube with that. But the spec sheet itself is pretty detailed. It's one of the more detailed that you'll get from me over the course of the semester. I talk about this in much more detail in the walkthrough, but since we're here, I'll kind of point out some things to you. I definitely recommend, in addition to the walkthrough, take a moment and just read this. Essentially what I'll summarize here right now, but I definitely recommend before you actually sit down to do it, that you read this in depth, because this assignment is much more about following directions than anything else. It very much walks you through exactly what I'm looking for. But in here, what I'm asking you to do is to look at these grids that I've set up on these pages and recreate them in HTML and CSS based on the specs that I have in place. You'll see in the walkthrough where I have you guys save it inside of your root folder. But basically what you're going to be doing is making an HTML page for each of the grids, and there's 4 of them, as well as making a CSS page or file that will control those. There'll be a total of 4 CSS files as well, for a total of 8 files. These will all be located in one root folder. That root folder name is here. Again, in the walkthrough, I kind of guide you through that. And I talk about some of these points in that walkthrough as well, but you're basically just going to zip that root folder when it's due. Actually, this is week 4 here. It's actually week 5. I'll put a correction for that. And again, this is something else I mentioned in the walkthrough, but I'll point it out here. Each of these pages represents a grid that you'll be building. And they're basic grids, one column grids, which very much kind of mirrors the website you guys are putting together right now. But I have on the very first page, I point out some things in red that hopefully will be helpful in that, like, for example, the very first page you're going to put together as a file, you're going to name grid1.html. And as I talked about in the walkthrough, it's a matter of opening up the starter file, doing a save as, calling it grid1.html, and saving it to the appropriate folder. Coding out the HTML for this, and the actual HTML tags for each of these containers are listed here on the side. So I'm literally giving you the code for those. And it might not make sense right now looking at these divs. We're going to talk about divs here shortly. That's what I'm going to do a live demo for you guys on that. And then you're going to create a CSS file, in this case called grid1 style.css. You'll link these two files together, and you'll give these grids all heights, widths, background colors, and in some instances, I'm going to be asking you guys to do some margins on those as well. So again, that's all covered inside the walkthrough. There are, on each page, there's a new grid that you'll create. They're fairly similar in nature. I think you'll find the repetitive nature of this by the time you're done doing 4 of them. It'll come pretty naturally to you. But there are some variations in terms of the heights and widths, as well as some of these get into widths of 100%. I actually walked through making grid 1 and grid 3 on that walkthrough. Yeah, so that's the first assignment. And again, we're going to create a grid today ourselves to give you some practice with this together. In fact, we are together today going to create, let's see, part 4 of project 1. We're going to do that together. Now, again, the assignment's going to really reinforce that. But as I'm showing you guys how to make grids, we're just going to all together take care of project 1, part 4. So by the time you're actually done with class today, you'll be able to submit that, which will be nice. Or if you just prefer to kind of sit back and watch, you can always watch the recording that we're making right now and do it at a slightly slower pace. Okay, so don't feel like you've got to work fast with me and bang this thing out. Again, you can always go back and watch the recording and do it. But here's the spec sheet for part 4. We'll open this up in a few moments, talk about it, and then we'll execute it. Time permitting, I would love to get into talking about hyperlinks. I've got a lecture in here for us that we can go through, but we won't necessarily do the entire thing. I definitely want to save some of it for next week, especially when it comes to styling, as well as doing the actual linking of multiple pages together. Okay. So that's the game plan for today. It's a lot, but I don't think that any one of these things will necessarily take a tremendous amount of time. So we should be able to take care of all of this in the allotted time that we have. So with that, we're just going to very much jump right in here. I guess the first thing we should probably do is talk a little bit about grid systems, and ultimately I want to tie them into talking specifically about part 4 of our project, which is actually building the grid. Okay? So what we're going to talk about with the box model today is how to create a container in HTML. And you can think of as a container as simply a box, and a box can be used to hold stuff. Okay? And when it comes to stuff, for the web, it really boils down almost exclusively to that stuff being text or images. Okay? Of course, you can also put like multimedia items in there, like video. We'll talk about video on the next project and how to actually work with that. But yeah, think of these containers as a way to put text or images into these boxes that we can then position on the page. Very much like if you're familiar with working in InDesign. Very much the way that like in InDesign that we create containers and then we position those. Okay, so it's just that. Now these boxes can be invisible and only the content themselves will show, or we can style them. We can put borders on them. We can put background colors in them. We can put background images in them, which sort of kind of acts like wallpaper almost. But we're going to start out talking about those, controlling the height and width, controlling the position, and then controlling things like margins and padding. So those are all the things that I want to go over with you guys with those. Let's take a look real quick at the project part 4 sheet. Then we'll all together jump into Visual Studio Code, and we'll begin taking care of this together then. So the spec sheet's pretty straightforward. What we'll be doing for this is creating an HTML and CSS file to use for the 4 pages for our website. The grid should contain a wrapper, a header, navigation, a content area. That content area is going to be ultimately where you guys put like your paragraphs and your images, as well as a footer. The entire grid should be put inside of what's called a wrapper. Okay, I'll talk about a wrapper. That'll be one of the very first things that we actually do. A wrapper is basically a container that holds the entire web page. And I'll talk about the importance of that, the pros and cons of using one. So in this, the width of the wrapper should be 960 pixels. And then what we'll do is we will define the height for some of our elements, including the header, navigation, and footer. And as it says here, we will not define a height for the wrapper or the content area. And I will absolutely explain the why behind that when we get there. This is actually the code that you're going to need to make that happen. If you do this later, like if you're watching this video later, you are absolutely okay just taking this code and copying and pasting it into an HTML document. For the demo we're going to do though together, I'm going to hand code this. It'll give me an opportunity to kind of talk about like what these things are, what they do, and the relationship between these things. Then what we will do is we will create a CSS file, and we will link the two together, and then we will begin to style our page. The wrapper, as it says here, should be centered. Okay. Oh, another thing I should mention here. In our project folder for this, we're going to create an HTML grid inside of a file called index. We're going to link that index page directly to the CSS file, that CSS file called style.css that you guys created in part 3 of your HTML of this project. So the style guide that you guys built, that style.css file, that's going to be linked directly to this document. Okay, we're going to build on that over the course of the next several weeks. Okay, again, that's going to go inside of a to the Google Drive inside of the Project One Grid shared folder. Okay, so again, I'm going to walk you guys through all this. I'm sure some of this may not make sense right now. It's all good. I'll walk us through it. So what we're going to do together is jump into Visual Studio Code. Okay, let's see, I'm going to just close some of the files I was working with earlier. All right, so as always, the way that we normally will begin when we're getting ready to make an HTML document together is we're going to start out by opening up the starter document that we've worked with now a few times. So we're all just going to go up to File and Open and track down your class folder. And we're going to go into the Resources folder and open up the starter.html file. I'll give you guys a moment to make that happen. Okay. Cool. Now, as always, when we open this file, we don't want to just directly start working in it, right? We want to take a moment and we want to do a save as and put it into the appropriate place. So this is where some, we want to be very specific. In the assignment sheet, the spec sheet, it states that we want to save this as a file called index. And I will definitely explain the importance of that in just a moment. But let's make sure that we're all calling it that and saving it in the right place. So I'm going to go to File and Save As. And this is going to go into our root folder, in the Projects folder. And then we've been working now for a few weeks with a folder called Project One and then your last name. And you can see in mine, same as yours, you should be seeing in there your proposal, your style.css file, your style guide, all those things we've been working on over the last few weeks. Now, the assignment sheet states that this file needs to be called index. So that's index.html. And let me take a brief moment and explain like the reasoning behind that. This page that we're making right now is going to become eventually the very first page of our project. And like the home page, essentially. You can effectively call your HTML files any file name that you want, except for your home page. The very first page of any website is always called index.html. And the reason behind that is because when you type in a URL and you go visit a website, you know, whether it's Google or Amazon or any website you ever go to, the browser is going to look in your folder, your root folder, and it's going to be looking for a file called index.html. And it's going to use that as the default first page that it pulls up. That's the logic or the reason behind why we're doing this. So index.html, very important that we name this page that. All right, cool. In fact, to kind of further that, why don't we just take a moment and for now in the title tags, it's probably on line 6 of your starter page, instead of it saying example, why don't we give this a specific name? I'm going to go ahead and just call this like homepage. But I could put, you know, I'm not building a specific site like you guys are. I could put something like homepage of, I don't know, I mean, like, you know, whatever your site is. So like, I don't know, looking at you guys here in the Zoom thing, like Chaz, I see you there, like this, you might type something like, you know, the history of Metallica or something that's applicable to like your websites, guys. It's not something you have to nail down now. Over the next few weeks, you can always modify this, but it's an opportunity to put that, you know, maybe I'll even put like, welcome to my homepage. Again, just sort of something generic for now. All right, cool. So we are going to begin now by creating the grid that's necessary to build our website. Okay. The code, again, that I'm about to type is in the spec sheet that we just went through. It's literally this. These, what, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. These 11 lines of code. That's essentially what I'm about to type in here now. But again, this is good. If I do it line by line instead of just copying and pasting it, it's going to allow me to explain these things to you guys. So when it comes to working with HTML containers, there are a number of containers that exist that we can use tags for. There are also some that are more generic that we can use really however we want. Okay? And I'm going to start with one of those. So I'm here inside my body tags. I'm just going to put a few returns in there. And I'm going to start out by creating or showing you guys just what a generic container looks like. It works with a tag that's called a div tag, D-I-V. A div tag has an opening tag and it has a closing tag. Think of a div as just a generic box. This box by default doesn't look like anything. It doesn't have any attributes yet. So if I were to save this and show it to you in an HTML document, I'll just pull this up real quick in the browser, doing my Alt-B shortcut. It doesn't look like anything, right? It's because I haven't styled it yet. It doesn't have any color associated with it. It doesn't have a border associated with it. If I did put a background color in it or a border right now, what you would actually see is a very, very short but very wide box that is sitting up here at the very top. And you'll get an opportunity to see what that looks like in a few moments. But that's what a generic div looks like. Okay. Let's go ahead and put a few returns in there. And we're going to come back to that. This is ultimately going to be our wrapper. But I want to talk about some of the other containers first, and then we'll talk about these generic div tabs once we get a few more in place. Okay, I think again, it'll kind of make sense. Bear with me on that. Okay, so in this, there were a few containers that we want to put. Actually, there's a number of containers. Let's see. In that, we're going to do a header first and then our nav. So there are certain container tags that do exist that we can use. Like, for example, when we're making a header, we can do something like that. Okay, a header is used at the top of a web page as a container that holds things like it can contain a graphic like a hero banner, or it can contain, sometimes you'll see at the top of websites, you'll see sort of a scrolling carousel type of a thing, or just some very prevalent type that's at the very top of a website. Sometimes websites have navigation up top and then the header. Other times there will be the header and then navigation. We can absolutely change the order of these quite easily. For our example today, we're going to start with the header. Okay, but for those of you who want to switch and put your nav up top, I'll talk about that once we get this taken care of, how easy it is to kind of swap those elements. Now, as you saw when I made the div, if there is nothing inside of it or there's no style, we can't really see anything. So what we're going to end up doing is just putting some temporary text inside of it so that we can see it, like when we test the browser. So let's just put in some text here that says, like, maybe this is my header. Okay, so I'll test this in the browser again so you guys can see it. It still is going to be very, very basic looking. You know, for all intents and purposes, you can't still see the container that we put this in, because again, we haven't styled it yet. Again, we'll get there, but at least you're starting to see this is my header. All right, next up, we are going to put in a container for our navigation. Just like the header tag, in HTML, we do have a tag that we can use for navigation to create a navigation container, and that is I don't want to capitalize, NAV, nav, and again, it has an opening and a closing tag. And again, so that we get some stuff in there, I'm just going to go ahead and type my links will go here. All right, let's see what else we've got going on here. Next up is going to be where we will eventually put all of the content in for your web page. We're going to put that in to a div as well, just because there is no tag, there's no generic or specific tag, I should say, that's called content. So we're going to use a div for that. Again, a div is just a container, a blank box. And let's go ahead and type in there, my content will go here. And then last but not least, we've got our footer, and there is a footer tag. And we can put something in there as well, just so that, again, something shows up. Okay. Again, this is all temporary content that will eventually start swapping out. All right, so I guess the $1,000,000 question is, what does this look like? Still not terribly impressive just yet, but let's look. Let's see what we've made. Okay. So here we've got these individual containers that are stacked one on top of each other, and they contain the text. And this is what unstyled containers look like. They don't really look like anything. They stack one on top of one another. By default, these containers just stack. Okay, that's like the natural default state of containers in HTML. We can break that order. We can rearrange things eventually, but by default, without any instructions, this is what they look like. They are also all by default left aligned, and also by default, they extend out the entire width of the web page. Okay. All right, so let's get a few things. Let's kind of take it another step further. Let's next create a style sheet, link the style sheet to the HTML document, and then let's just get one of these containers coded. Okay, so let's see. over the Visual Studio Code again. So next, we're just going to make a brand new file. It's going to be a CSS document. And we'll do this by going to File, New File. So I'm not used to this asking me like what kind of file I want here, but I'm going to go ahead and tell it a CSS file. Oh, no, take that back. We're not going to make a new file. My bad. We're actually going to open up the existing CSS file called style that we made. So my bad. Strike that from the record. As the assignment sheet says, we want to work with the existing style sheet that you guys made for the previous part 3 assignment. So I'm just going to go ahead and do a file and open. Notice that that style sheet is inside the same folder as my HTML file and my style guide and my proposal. It's my project 1 folder. Okay, this is critical. If it's not inside the same folder, this will not work. Okay, but I'm going to go ahead and open that up. And I've got all my, all the type in there from last week, what you guys had done with defining the H tags, paragraph, list, all that good stuff. Okay. Now, I prefer when I'm creating containers, I prefer for that to be the first things in my style sheet. I like to work from a standpoint of the containers and the structure of the website, kind of working down through the more specific things like working with text. There is a reason for that. The name cascading style sheets is quite literal. The code executes in the order that it's written. I prefer, for me at least, when I'm making websites, I prefer for the containers to be the first thing that's established within a site rather than the text. It just makes for a more attractive load, as well as it makes for, how do I explain this? It's taking care of more of the, I guess, the heavy lifting right off the bat, the structure of the website, and then getting into the more specific design elements. So I'm just going to go up here to line 1, maybe add a few returns. Now, eventually I'm going to put in the wrapper first, but I don't want to start with the wrapper yet. I want to start with you guys with the header first. We're going to do header, we're going to do the nav, and we'll do the footer. Then we'll go back to doing the divs because I want to show you something very specifically. Again, there's sort of a method of the madness here. So let's start with the header. We'll call out to the header by first typing the name of the tag and then having an opening and closing curly brackets. And then from here, we can go ahead and start to give it some attributes. Like, for example, what are properties and attributes? Let's start with a height and a width. Okay, so for this, I'm going to start with a width. This is the width of the actual container. Now, all of us, for the width of this project, I asked you guys to design your banners at a width of 960 pixels. So that's one thing I'm going to put in here. Now, we haven't really done structural elements yet. So it's just, width. Remember that a semicolon always separates the property and the value. When you are coding a dimension or a size, we are always going to include the PX. That's necessary. If I don't have that, if I just put 960, it will not work. Okay. I pointed out simply because that's one of the more familiar or common errors that I see with beginning web designers. And then remember that, actually, I'm sorry, that was a colon. Here's the semicolon. The semicolon actually ends that line of code. Now, for the height, I gave you guys 3 different heights in which you designed your banners a couple of weeks ago. There was what, 240, 320, and 360, I believe. I'm going to go ahead and use a value of 360. You can use the same. If your banner ended up being a different height, no worries. We can modify that next week when we actually start plugging images into this. So none of this stuff is written in stone. It's very, very easily edited. All right, last thing I'm going to put in here for now is a background color. And then for this, I'm just going to do a really basic one, maybe red. And finally, I'm going to save this CSS document. Remember, if you don't save it, the changes will not show up. All right, now there's one more aspect we have to do in order to test this, and that is link our HTML file over to our CSS file. So I'm going to go over to my index.html, scroll up here to the head area, and I'm going to click after my title and hit return. And that's where I'll go ahead and link up our CSS file. This is that same line of code you guys used last week with your style guide. Okay, so it's just a link tag with a rel property. It is a style sheet. Lastly, we need a code to link it. That's going to be href, hyperlink reference. And the file we're linking to is called style.css. And last but not least, actually, probably the most important thing of this, you need that closing caret right there. All right, cool. That's the code that we use to link our style sheet. Let's just make sure this is working, okay? Again, if I test this in the browser, what we should be seeing is our header container should be 960 pixels wide, 360 pixels tall, and it should have a background color of red. So this will be our first chance of actually seeing one of our containers like in action, okay? Let's give it a shot. Okay, there we go. Cool. So I have a red background in my container. It's 960 pixels wide. It's 360 pixels tall. And at this point, the text inside of it is not styled. That's okay. We'll get there eventually. But over the next few moments, we're just going to be going forward and actually tweaking the individual containers and getting them set up and ready to go. Okay. Now, another thing that I'm going to do, now that I know that this is working, I am going to go over to my CSS. I am going to take the width out of here. I'll explain why when we get to the wrapper. But for now, I wanted you to really see what that looks like. But I am going to take it out. I'll show you now what a div looks like without that. Yep. 1 second, let me close that. So there we go. So if we do not give a div or a container a width, it will extend out to the entire edge of the browser window. And notice that if I move my browser window and expand it, it will always fill it no matter what the width is, because the default width is 100%. Okay. All right, let's see here. Close some of that. All right, so we just made the code, the CSS code for the header tag. Next, we're going to do our nav. So we'll head over to the style sheet again. I'll go under my header and type nav. And for this, again, we can give it a height. Now, at this point, we're going to put an arbitrary height in there. The height of this will likely change over the next week or two in your actual project, based on, like, you know, when we actually style our links next week and we get them to have a specific height and you know, a font. So we'll change that, but let's just use sort of an arbitrary height. Maybe we'll go like 60 pixels for now. Okay. In fact, I'm going to put in a comment, which is code that we're putting in there, or not code, but a comment that we're putting in for ourselves that we can basically making a note. We can add a comment with a slash and a star. And then I'm going to type something along the lines of needs to be adjusted next week. And now the thing about these comments is that if I don't close the comment, it will comment out all of the rest of my code, okay? So I do want to close a comment with a star and another slash. And now notice how all my rest of my code comes back to normal, okay? All right, another thing that we're going to do here for the nav, again, let's give it a background color. These background colors are absolutely temporary, okay? Today, it's going to be kind of ugly. Over the course of the next week, you can actually start to implement your own colors into this. But this just allows us to see them, okay? So I'm giving the nav a height, giving it a background color. Again, I'm actually not giving it a width. We'll add those widths in a moment. I'm going to show you a very nice, quick, and easy way to do it. But I am going to test this again in the browser. And there we go. So I've got my header. I've got the area that's eventually going to hold my links. Let's go ahead and do the footer next. Then we'll take care of the content and the wrapper. So again, I'm just jumping over to my CSS file. I'll add my footer. Again, I'll give that a height. Once again, this is sort of an arbitrary value. We may almost certainly going to need to tweak this next week when we're actually starting to put stuff in there. And once again, I'm going to go ahead and throw in a background color. Let's do green. Okay. Cool, not bad. We've got our header, our nav, and our footer in place. One more quick save. I'm going to test this one more time. And there we go. Now, real quick, before we do the next elements, an important topic we should just kind of talk about. This will take like 2 minutes. Every time I coded one of my containers, I tested it in the browser to make sure it was working. This is the habit that I would love you all to get into. Every single element that you code, you then test it. The reasoning behind this is if one of these things ends up not working and is broken, I know it immediately and I know what to fix. What becomes very difficult, guys, to troubleshoot is if you do a whole bunch of code and then you test it and you find out that something's broken, you don't necessarily know where the break occurred. And it can be a painful and time-consuming process of debugging. Versus if I just take the 2 seconds after I code each one of these things and I test it, if it's not working, I know exactly where it's broken. And it's in the chunk of code that I just made versus, if I make 20 lines of, or 20 chunks of code controlling 20 things and one of them's broken, I have no idea where where things went bad because there's a direct relationship between these things. So just some food for thought. I would, if I could communicate anything to you guys over the course of this class, it's get in that habit of doing that. It will save you a ton of time and trouble along the way. All right, so we are now at a point where we're ready to talk about coding the wrapper, which is surrounded by a div, as well as the content area, which is surrounded by a div. Now, here's where things become, we're gonna run into a problem, and I want to show you the fix for it. But it's going to make more sense if I just show you the problem. Let's just say, for example, that I want to control maybe my wrapper. Okay, and let's say I go into my style sheet. And this part I don't want you guys to code because I'm going to show you a better way of doing this. So let me show you the problem first that we're trying to solve for. If I come into my code here and I code for a div, and let's say I give it a height, and maybe I want my, I don't know, maybe I want it to be 480 pixels. Maybe I give it a width as well. Maybe I give it a background color as well. Make that purple. Okay. All right, let's see what's going on here if I were to test this out now. So I save that and I go to my HTML and I test it. So the content area looks really good, but what you're not actually seeing here, and I can probably take the content area out so that we can do that. In fact, let me do that. Let's do this so you can get a good visual representation. For a moment, I'm going to take this out. I'm going to do that by using an HTML comment. This is an HTML comment, a caret explanation dash dash. Let me close that with a dash dash caret. So if I do that and I test this out, let's see what we get here. Here, let me make the height of this a little bit bigger because you're still not quite seeing exactly what that's doing. So let's give it a height that's much bigger. Let's say I want my website to be 1280 pixels tall, maybe. Okay. If I add that and I test this, you can see that my 3 containers are here, and the wrapper, the thing that holds them all, has got a purple background color. That's all lovely. But the issue here is if I bring this back in and save this, now the header, I'm sorry, the content area is 1280 pixels tall, and so is the wrapper behind it, okay? Again, you can't see it because this stuff is in here, but we've got 2 instances of the div tag being used, one for the wrapper and one for my content. So if I code instructions for a div to behave a certain way, it's going to control my wrapper and make it do that, and it's going to control my content area, okay? So let me give you sort of a real world analogy for this, for code that does this. So let's say, okay, like when I was a kid, when I was up until I was 6 years old, I was an only child. So if my mom came in the room and she were to give me instructions, like if she were to come in the room and say, go clean your room. Well, I knew exactly who she was talking to, and I knew what I should do. Okay. But as I eventually got a brother and a younger sister, then if she walked in the room and said, go clean your room, there would be confusion because there are 3 people in one set of instructions. Versus if she walked in the room and said, Peter, go clean your room, I knew who she was talking to and what she wanted me to do. And that analogy carries over in the code very well. We have to give these divs individual names so that we can call out to them and give them instructions specifically. Otherwise, we run into the issue that I just sort of talked about, wherein if we just give generic instructions to a div tag, all the div tags are going to do that same thing. And we definitely don't want our wrapper and our content to do the exact same things, okay? Or for that matter, any additional divs that we might add. So we want to give these divs names. You can give any HTML tag a name, and we're going to explore this a lot over the remaining weeks in our semester. So let's do this together on the first one. I'm going to go to my opening div, the div that surrounds the rest of the web page. And I'm going to click here after the V, but before the closing caret, and I'm going to throw a space in there, and I'm going to type the attribute class. Now, all attributes in HTML always have an equal sign, and all attributes, when after the equal sign, always have quotations that the value goes inside of. Now, this is a name that we can make up. We can call this thing anything that we want, with the exception of a few things. Like, for example, I could just go ahead and just say name, for example. We can add a number to the name, but about the only rule that we really have to follow here is that the name cannot start with a number. Okay, so that does not work. I can't put a number there. Also, no special characters. The common question I usually get is like, what's a special character? I mean, you can put dashes, you can put underscores. Beyond that, I would not use any other characters, okay? In fact, I'm going to even recommend you don't use dashes and underscores. I'll show you in a little bit an alternate method. Like, for example, if you wanted to use 2 words, like, for example, if I wanted 2 words, this is very generic, obviously I'm typing 2 words, but if you had 2 words to your name, what most developers do, sort of like best practices, is not putting a space, but capitalizing the additional word, or if you any additional words beyond that, you would just, again, capitalize. This is referred to as camel casing, just using an uppercase on additional words. You don't have to do that, but I'm showing it to you because it is very much industry standard practices to do that, okay? Now, fortunately, Also, in the terms of like best practices and industry standards, when we make a wrapper out of a div that holds the entire site, it's common practice to name it wrapper. Okay? Again, I don't technically have to call it wrapper. I could call it anything. I could call it Bob. But you know, another developer might come along and look at this thing called Bob and be like, what the heck is going on? So my recommendation is to call that wrapper. So now I have a specific name called wrapper that we can call out to instead of div. So it would make sense then for us to also give this div, this container down here, a name as well. And again, all names are done in classes. Technically, there's another way you can name things. It's called an ID, but that's another story for another day. My div that's going to hold my stuff, I like to call content. Again, technically, you can call that anything you want, but that's one that kind of makes a little bit makes sense. Ultimately, whatever you do name your containers, name them things that really do make sense to you. Okay? All right. Now we can finally get to coding these things. So I'm going to go over to my style sheet, and I'm actually going to get rid of the code where I'm styling that div, because that is not something that we want to do. Rather, we want to call out to our classes or tags by the class name. Being that the wrapper is the very first thing inside my body tags, I'm going to actually code that first in my style. So I'm going to go all the way up to the top, put a few returns in there. And let's talk about how we call out to a class. For tags, as we've been doing now for a few weeks, we just call out to it by the tag name. Okay? But it's a little bit different for a class. We can't just call out to the wrapper like this. There is no tag called wrapper. We made that name up. So to inform the style sheet that that's what we're doing, we actually begin with a dot wrapper. A dot means that we are calling out to a class. And we'll add a comment in there to remember that. In fact, here, I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. Put in my little /star. Or let's say the dot is used for classes. And then I will end that little comment there with the star and the slash. Okay. We'll start putting in little notes like this into our code a lot over the next several weeks so that you guys can reference what we're doing here. All right, for the wrapper. The wrapper is used for a few things, guys. It's used to hold the whole site. So I mentioned we would talk about pros and cons of this. Many pros for this is that I can define the width of a wrapper, and it will therefore control the width of everything inside of it. Okay, so let's try this. If I add a width and I make the width 960 pixels, I want you to see what this will now look like. So I'm going to save that. Head back over here, do that Alt-B. So I didn't save something. Let's see what I didn't save, because it should not be looking like that. Is that? Yeah, that's my guy. This is the proper page. There we go. What the heck? Let me close some of these pages real quick. And get back over here. I just want to make sure I'm saving that HTML, saving my style. Let's launch this and see. There we go. That's what it should be looking like. So notice that all of my containers now are 960 pixels wide. So I guess the question is why? Well, remember when I showed you earlier that when containers do not have a width, they will naturally extend out all the way to the end of the browser window. So that's what's happening to them inside the wrapper. Again, the wrapper is holding all of them. It's sort of like a master container, or a container that wraps the entire page. That's where the name wrapper comes from. So if these containers are by default extend all the way out to the edge, in this case, they're extending out to the edge of the wrapper, the thing that's holding them. So this eliminates a lot of redundant code. I don't have to actually tell each of my containers to have a specific width. I can do it once with the wrapper. And the nice thing about this is if I decide I want to change that, maybe I want to make that instead of 960, I want to make it 1260. I can change that one line of code. And again, all of the other containers will now stop at 1260 because they're inside the wrapper. So that's also nice because then I don't have to go to each and every single container and keep changing that line of code. Okay? That's one of the pros of dealing with a wrapper. The other pro of dealing with a wrapper is what I'm going to show you guys next. If I want to center my website so it's in the center of the web browser, I can do that with the wrapper. Now, I could have done it with every single container, but again, it's a lot easier and a lot less code if I'm only doing it in one place. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit return. And the way that we center a container is with this chunk of code. We say margin, and we set it to auto. And let's make a note to ourselves so we understand what that's doing later on. This, I'm just going to say this centers the container. Cool. Let's try it out. Let's give this a save. Head over to the HTML document. And if I test this in the browser, there we go here. I'm sorry, this our little Zoom window is there, but here, if I could try and pull this up on top of it, it's usually it will let me, there we go. Let's just kind of minimize that. Cool, so now my entire site is centered. And as I expand or contract the browser window, it always remains centered, which is nice. Okay. So that's what's going on there. Now, something I want to point out, and this is important, it says it in the assignment sheet, but I'm going to reiterate it here. The wrapper does not have a height. We don't want it to have a height. We want it to be fluid. We're going to let the stuff, the content on a page-by-page basis determine how tall or how short that wrapper is, okay? So the wrapper as well as the content area, that's what we're going to do. And again, over the next few weeks, as we start to put stuff into these websites, you're going to totally understand why. It might not make a lot of sense right now. No worries. I promise you that a lot of the stuff really starts to make sense as we start putting more and more stuff in here. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and take care of the content area then next. Again, I'm just sort of coding these in order. So wrapper came first, header, nav. And that's why I jumped down here in between the nav and the footer. So I'm going to call out to the content class. Because I'm calling out to a class, I need to begin with a dot. Content. Okay. And for the content area, at this point, all I'm going to do with this is just put in a background color. I don't want the content area to have a, let's maybe make it yellow, or maybe orange. Okay. I don't want that to have a height as well. Again, the paragraphs of type as well as the images that we plug in here over the next few weeks, that will determine the height of the content. The reason that for this is, guys, is that your HTML pages are not all going to have the same amount of stuff in them. Some of your pages will just have more stuff or less stuff. And we want the content container to be fluid and to be able to determine its height based on what we put in there. We let the content itself dictate the height. So for now, just having an orange color or any color in there is perfectly fine. I'm going to save this one more time, jump over to the HTML one more time and test this in the browser. And there we go. This is what the first portion of our container for our website will look like. Every website I've ever built begins looking this basic. It's just a series of colored squares or containers or rectangles that I place on a page and I order them, okay? But this project is all about taking these baby steps, sort of little tiny steps that are all very easy and then all tie together wonderfully at the very end, okay? So for part 4 of our project, project 1, part 4, this is what we are doing. Now there's one more step. I want to add the navigation, like the links in here. This chunk of code right here, we still have to do. But in terms of the actual structure, that's it. And most folks look at this and they go like, I get a lot of emails during this week, usually in the class, where a lot of folks are like, I did the thing, but it just looks so simple. And it does, totally. It looks really simple. But trust me, guys, over the next few weeks, when we start adding the type and the images and everything, it absolutely comes to life. Okay, but this is it. This is what part 4 will look like. So again, there was one more step to this, and that was adding the hyperlinks that will go into our navigation area. Okay, so let's go ahead and code those next. So I'm going to replace the my links will go here stuff with the code for our links. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a return here and put this inside of the nav. So hyperlinks use what's called an A tag at its very basic level. That's the tag that we use for hyperlinks. Now, just an A tag by itself really won't do anything. You've got to put something in there. Whatever you type in there is what will display. So this would display, in fact, here, I will show you what it displays. You're going to see the word home. It's going to be blue with an underline. Let's take a look. Oh, actually, I didn't add the hyperlink attribute. Let me just save that one more time. So yeah, it's not ready to show up blue just yet. It's close. With that being said, we should not put blue in as the background color of our nav. I should have thought about that because the links by default are going to be blue. So I'm actually going to jump over to my style sheet for a minute. I'm just going to change my nav from being blue to something else, maybe black. Okay. All right. So we do need one other property to make this work inside of the A tag, and that's what's called an href attribute. You've actually seen hrefs. We use hrefs when we're linking out to documents. So we already used hrefs to link out to our style sheet. We would use an href in this case to link out to our homepage. Now, we're actually on our homepage, but these links are going to eventually be in all of our pages. We know right now that our homepage is called index.html. In fact, we know that all web pages that have home pages, that they are called index.html. I'm going to save this real quick, and I will show you what this looks like. There we go. Okay, you will likely find when you're coding this project that your home link is going to start out looking purple. This is default HTML. By default, links are blue, but there are 4 different states for links. I'll go into this in depth next week. What you're seeing right now is what's called the visited state of this link. A visited link is the state that the link will show in when you've already been to that page. And my browser thinks we've already been to the index page. In fact, we have. We've tested this index page over and over and over again along the way. So we've been here many times, and the browser recognizes that. And so it's displaying that link as a visited link, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong there. But we are going to go ahead and set up the links for our other pages as well. For now, we're going to use generic page names. I'm just going to link to something called page 1. And in my navigation, I'm going to make the link say page 1. Now, in your real project, when we're tweaking this over the next few weeks, you might change this to say, you know, it really depends on your projects. Some of you had like history pages, or the different pages, you would actually type what page they're going to rather than just generically page 1. I'll show you that as we move forward. But we're going to do this 4 times because there are 4 pages that will be in our finished website. And it ends up being fairly redundant looking. So, if you feel comfortable, you can certainly copy and paste instead of retyping this. Good practice though for you guys when you're beginners to hand code this stuff and kind of really drill it in. All right. That's what our navigation right now will look like in terms of the HTML. Again, if I save this and I test it out in the browser, why that keeps happening, I'm doing the wrong shortcut. I'm not doing Alt-B, I'm doing Control or Command-B. There we go. All right, there we go. Those are some examples of some unvisited links. Now, right now, if I clicked on these, they're not going to work. They're not going to go anywhere. We're going to get an error. We're going to see a file not found page. That's because that page doesn't exist yet. We haven't made it. We're making those next week. Actually, we're about 2 weeks away from actually making those. Okay, but this is what it's going to look like. Eventually, next week, actually, we're going to style these links. We're going to probably center them. We're going to spread them apart. We're going to make them look real nice. Okay, but for today, it's more about the structure of the containers and less about the stuff in them. Okay, and this is ultimately what your part 4 is going to look like. Now, you might use different colors than me. That's fine. If you want to use the color palettes that you're planning on using in your actual sites, that's totally fine. It does not have to be this hideous combination of red, black, orange, and green that I've concocted here. It can be, again, really whatever you want for it. But that is part 4. So I know I moved through that at a relatively rapid pace. I wanted to make sure that I got all that in. So if I just went too fast for you, no worries. Just watch the class recording from the beginning and you can kind of, easily walk through that. It was about an hour long in terms of making that happen. I think you'll find though, once you've done this a few times, you could bang out a page like this in all of about, 3-4 minutes. It's really not bad. There's actually not that much code. It took so long because I wanted to give you guys some thorough explanations of what was actually happening there. Okay. Let's see here. Why don't we figure out what's the best way for us to spend our remaining 40 minutes? Let's see. We still have on the docket here a small lecture that I want to do on hyperlinks. I'm not going to do the entire lecture, as I mentioned. I'll do a bit, and then I'll open things up for questions, because inevitably there may have been some issues that you encountered if you tried to follow me there. There usually is. It's okay. It's natural. But let's maybe talk, before we do that, about hyperlinks. So there's a lecture in here, and then there's some resources as well that I want to point out for you guys. But yeah, let me actually open up the lecture file first. It's just a PDF. And these don't typically display very well through the D2L class, but I bet you, let's try full screen. Okay, not bad. Cool. So in here, we're going to talk a little bit about HTML hyperlinks, styling hyperlinks, and this goes into 3 subjects for next week as well. This is a lecture we're going to be revisiting over the next, basically 2 weeks. So today we're just going to talk about HTML hyperlinks. I'm not going to worry about styling hyperlinks today, but I want to talk specifically about hyperlinks because there's a number of things. I'm minimizing this, I know, but I want to go into my code. There are more than just HTML pages like this that you can put in here. This types of links are what are referred to as relative links. They're linking to pages inside of our own site. There are also what are called absolute links. You guys have all been to websites that link to other websites. That's one of the beautiful things about the web, right? As compared to, let's say, traditional print media, is that documents can link to each other, and they can link to entirely different websites altogether. There's a third kind of link as well. They all look the same. They all start with the href, or sorry, ahref. There's another kind. Have you guys ever been to a website that's one page? It might be really long. It's just a single page. And if you click on a link, like it scrolls you down to that part of the page. That's another type of link you can work with That's referred to as an anchor link. So let's talk a little bit about those here. All right, so again, hyperlinks. Okay, so as you guys saw in the demo we just did, and the A tag creates a link in HTML, and at its most basic level, it looks like this. There's an opening A and a closing A. There are many attributes that can be added to A tags, but the most important attribute of the A tag is the href attribute, which indicates the link's destination. Okay, so this is very similar to what we just did. I don't actually want to go back. I don't like the way these lectures display. Let's see. All right, and that would just be the href, and within the quotations is the name of the actual, or the path to the document we're going to. Inside of the two A tags, we can either place text or an image. Okay, so images can absolutely be links. You've probably clicked on many images on web pages in your time and gone somewhere. Okay, we'll work on some of those over the next few weeks as well. Styling the hyperlinks is about as far as I want to take our conversation today. This will be kind of a bridge to talking about things next week. So styling the A tag in CSS is done with 4 what are called pseudo classes. These control the 4 link states. And we'll work with these next week. But in our style sheet, we can control the way that the link looks, the way the visited link looks, the hover state of link, and the active state. And a link is the normal unvisited link. So it's the way the link looks when the page first loads up. That link is not being clicked on. It's not being hovered over by the mouse. It's just a link hanging out, minding its own business, just looking the way that you want it to look. The visited state, as you guys saw by default, shows up as purple. In fact, all of these by default show up in Times Roman type with an underline underneath them. Now, those things can obviously be modified. You know, a very common thing to do is take the underline off and maybe over a hover state when we're hovering our mouse, make it appear. All very easy stuff to do. We'll work with that next week. But a visited state is the way the link looks when it's been clicked on. Hover is the way that the link looks when you're hovering your mouse over it. It's oftentimes referred to as a rollover. And the active state is the way the link looks during that brief moment when the user is pressing the mouse down and clicking on the actual link. Okay. And really that for today is as far as I wanted to take this lecture, just because I want to actually code these next week with you in the styles. And all of the rest of this is very much referring to that. Yeah, images and HTML, we'll deal with that next week. Yep. Okay, all of this stuff is sort of a to be continued. All right, that is a very, very basic explanation of links, which we'll expound upon over the next few weeks. Okay. So I'll open things up for questions in just a moment. But before I do, just in case you're maybe one of the students who does not have a question, I just want to make sure that you understand what's happening here for next week. There's really 2 bits of homework. Number 1 is the in-class box model assignment that I started talking about at the beginning. I strongly recommend that you watch the walkthrough demo. You know, just links right out to this. Very much like the style guide that you guys did last week. A little bit longer. This is about a 29-minute tutorial or walkthrough of each where I'm explaining things. So a more detailed explanation of what I went through with you guys today. That should really help put that together. How did you guys find the style guide walkthrough? Was that helpful for you guys last week?
Yeah, I think it worked really well for me.
Good to hear, Chaz. Yeah, I'm sort of assuming that it went well. I literally got 0 questions via email on it. But and that usually means one of 2 things. Either it went really well or so bad that like nobody was even could even ask a question. But when I looked in the folder before class, it looked like all of you guys had submitted that. So that was awesome. So yeah, hopefully that helps with this as well. Again, there's going to be 4 grids you put together. That walkthrough will walk you through making 2 of them, number 1 and number 3. that should give you the ammunition that you need to complete all 4. But as always, if there's a question, if you have an HTML question, CSS question along the way, you can always zip up your RIP folder and attach it to an email and send it over. But that's one bit of homework that you'll be doing. The other bit of homework that you'll be doing would be the grid system that we just put together. And you'll be able to watch that video once we're done with class, and I get that posted to YouTube. Now, let's open it up to questions. I'm happy to answer coding questions that you might have. Before we do coding questions, do any of you have specific questions regarding the assignment that maybe there's a parameter or a spec that you're not sure of that I can answer before we dig into coding? Anybody at all? Expand this.
So when I do the Alt B and I open my website after I followed along with the coding, for the header, the parameters are defined and it stops at a certain point, the width. But for the other ones, it just keeps on going. So
gotcha. So do they extend all the way out to the edge of the screen, Jacob?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So one of 2 things are happening there. And this might be an instance where I have no problem with you just sharing your folder with me, because likely your issue is happening with other students as well. So one of 2 things are happening. Either the wrapper is not defined or does not have a defined width, or there's just no wrapper at all. Okay. If you don't mind, just so that I could use this as a learning example for everybody, could I get you to zip your whole RIP folder and throw it onto the Google Drive for me? I'll open it up and show everybody how to fix something like that, because very likely that's going to happen with many students.
Sure.
Cool. Let me jump over to the Google Drive, and I'll have you put it. I'll let you know where to put that.
Do you know what? If I can interject real quick,
Sure.
I do have the wrapper correctly and the width, and that's happening with me as well.
Okay.
Me too.
I can't get it centered.
Okay, cool. Yeah, like I said, I have a feeling this was going to be happening with many of you, so it's all good. Let's definitely take care of this.
Okay, thanks.
So let's see here. So Jacob, before you submit your folder to me, before you zip it, please make sure that you save your HTML and CSS files in Visual Studio Code, because if they're not saved, I won't be getting the most current version of your stuff.
I'll make sure it's saved.
Cool. Let me jump into the Google Drive then. And let's have you put that just right inside of the root level of the basic web design folder in the 2022. So right in here, if you drop that off, I'll download it and unzip it. And
Okay.
we'll talk about that.
The one that says in class 1 root folder.
Don't even worry about the in class, just right inside the 2022 fall folder would be great.
Oh, okay. Just inside that one.
Yep.
Okay, it should be uploaded now.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Let me download that. Okay. Cool. I'm going to unzip it. All right. Cool. So just so that one of the things I like to do, guys, whenever I'm working with multiple sites, I will close any pages that I currently have open. I can't tell you how many times in the past I've had multiple websites open at the same time, and I think I'm working in one, but I'm actually working in the other one, and I'm not fixing a problem, but actually causing a problem in another site. So that's just my own way of working. I like to get those things closed, but we'll go into the projects folder, and we'll look inside the project 1 folder. Okay, perfect. So the first thing I wanted to verify, and we're good to go here, is that Jacob does have his index page and his style.css inside the same folder. So that's a great starting point. We're going to go ahead and open those up then in Visual Studio Code. And we're going to take a look then first in the browser, and we'll see what this looks like. Okay, cool. So it looks like the header, very much like you're describing, the header is being controlled, the rest is not. So I suspect the issue is going to be that the wrapper is closing early. It's closing right after the header and not after the rest, or there may not be a wrapper and maybe the header itself has a width. Let's take a look and see what's going on with that. Let's see, I'm trying to get Visual Studio Code, but it was covered by Zoom. All right, so let's see here. Okay. So the HTML actually looks to be good. What I'm looking at here is I'm looking for the div for the wrapper. I'm then next looking for the div for the content. That div ends here, which means that this div ends for the wrapper. Now, something you don't have to do this, guys, but something I like to do. I like to align an opening tag with its closing tag so I can very, very clearly see it if they're separated like this. Okay. You know, same thing. I don't know if I did it went to this level in my example, but like I'll do this as well. This won't affect the way the code is read. It only affects the way that we read it as like visual designers. We can see where one begins and where one ends. So the HTML actually looks good, Jacob. Let's take a look at what's happening inside the CSS. Okay. Cool. Your CSS wrapper looks good. Okay. So a few things here. The content, there's definitely an issue here with its width. It's missing.
Yeah, I need to put in the pixels.
But with that being said, we really shouldn't need this. And the reason why I'm saying we shouldn't need this is because the wrapper should be controlling that for us. So I'm going to take that out. I'm going to take out the width on the header. There's the nav, there's the footer. Okay. So this all looks pretty good here. The next thing to investigate is making sure that the spelling of wrapper matches up in both cases. So wrapper is spelled correct here. Definitely spelled correctly there. Let me save this one more time and give it a test in the browser. Okay. So the wrapper right now, at least to me, doesn't look like it's really controlling anything. So let's see here. What else could be affecting this? I am for a moment going to debug this by commenting out all of the stuff inside of the wrapper. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and do an HTML comment that looks like that. And then I'm going to put the closing comment tag here. And what the browser is going to do now is it's going to ignore this stuff altogether. Okay. I'm going to save that, but I am going to go over to the style sheet and let's just see. So we should end up seeing now a wrapper that has a blue-violet background. Let's just see if that's the case. At least that way we'll know that the wrapper is at least, you know, taking instructions. And it is not. Okay, so something's up with the wrapper. Otherwise, we would see it. It would be blue, and it would likely have a width of 960 pixels. So this may not be the issue that's happening specifically with all of you. We can look at all of these, but I want to see what's the deal here.
It's the same issue I'm having too.
Yeah. Okay.
Me as well.
Okay. Cool. And you guys have like a similar thing where the wrapper's just not responding, huh?
Yeah, it looks exactly the same.
Okay. Cool.
Having that issue, mine is working fine, so I'm not sure.
Good, good. I mean, I'm glad to hear that some of you have it working. Let's see. Let me see here. So give me a moment. I'm gonna just put something inside the wrapper. Okay. Okay, I'm gonna kind of work fast. This is I just run a couple of tests because it all looks good to me. Like I don't necessarily see an obvious thing here. So I'm just going to add a manual one here myself. We'll test it out. Okay, cool. So I am getting a response out of this one. So something is different between these two. And I'll be honest with you, I don't see what that something is in that.
I think it might be the little quotation marks. I feel like the first one is facing to the left instead of to the right.
I do see that. Yeah. Yeah. The quotations there definitely look different to me.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if that, it's interesting because the others do not. I don't know how to make those kind of quotes. Good eye. Thank you for that. I would have been like racking my brain over this because the code looks identical. Yeah, I don't know how those quotes are made. I don't know if it maybe came from copying and pasting possibly some code. That could be it, but it's definitely the quotations is the issue here because when I
Yeah.
retype them,
That's exactly what it was. I copied and pasted. Now I fixed it and it worked.
cool.
Yeah,
Yeah,
same
me
for me.
Same for me. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem, no problem.
Good eye.
I'm super happy that ended up happening, so we could address it. You know, like that's awesome. But yeah, it looks like that ended up taking care of it. So if I just retype those, test it out in the browser, we're good. But this is good because you guys got to start to see me debugging, wherein I eliminated things to try and get to the core element where there was an issue. So at this point, I can take out the test. I can uncomment out the the code, and we're working. Cool. Okay. Yeah, that's odd because I will tell you guys, I have been using this assignment for a long time. I've been teaching HTML classes a long time. I've never once seen that issue. So I'm not sure what the deal is specifically right now, if there is something that's new inside of Visual Studio Code, but I don't know. I feel like the other quotes would have been messed up there as well. So I'm not sure.
In your assignment, it looks like that. It's a little snippet. It's
Yeah,
in the
okay.
assignment like that.
Gotcha. Yeah, and obviously at some point, in Visual Studio Code, that's now it's an issue, or maybe it's just the browser that's an issue. So, but yeah, at least we've got a solution for that. So if that does end up happening to you guys, that's how we take care of it. So Jacob, I'm going to go ahead and kill the copy of your folder up here and give that a shot in terms of tweaking that. It should work for you. Any other coding issues that might have popped up as we were working along there? And I guess another kind of thing to reiterate, once I eliminated all the stuff and we still saw that there was a problem, and as I looked at that code and I said, boy, that looks correct. Another thing I did, and again, it's important for you guys to see this, I retyped it on its own line independently and I ran a test. And that's when we noticed that, hey, this one works, that one doesn't. So the immediate question is, what's the difference between them? And while I certainly didn't notice that there was a difference in the quotations, you guys did. And that ultimately is how we problem solved that. That's a big part of web design, is learning how to problem solve. We'll do a lot of it over the next few weeks. And oftentimes I'm going to ask you guys to do what we just did here, upload your files so that you guys can actively watch me troubleshoot through the code. I think that's as important of a skill as coding. It is, debugging that code when there's issues. Okay, cool. Any other coding questions? No? Cool. Okay. All right, awesome, guys. So in terms of demo and lecture, that's all I've got for you guys today. So we'll wrap up a little bit early, but I just want to mention, kind of prep us for next week. We're going to handle next week in a similar fashion to how we did today. I will inevitably make a walkthrough for part 5 of the project, but there is some things that I'm going to want to do some hand coding demos with you guys, like we did today. So we are going to talk next class about how to take those banners that you guys designed and how to save them effectively for the web. I will warn you ahead of time, I'm going to very much ruin the way that you guys look at the web for the rest of your lives, because you're going to notice when images are saved well, and you're going to start noticing when images are saved very poorly. Because poorly saved images really wreck the way that a website performs. It takes forever for things to download. And when they finally do download, they look horrible. You're going to start to notice this. Now, it's a good thing from a standpoint of you will never necessarily commit that cardinal sin of saving things the wrong way. But we'll go extensively into talking about the different compression formats, when they should be used, when they should not be used. And by the end of next class, you'll be able to save images that look awesome for the web, that are very, very small in file size and perform well. We'll do that with a series of images that I've uploaded, as well as your actual banners. We'll learn how to plug those banners into your website, as well as other images. And we'll also talk about starting to put the type in for your final project, or your project 1. So one of the things that you may want to consider doing that will definitely give you a jump start on next week, because whether you do it this week or next week, you'll have to do it eventually over this next couple of weeks. You want to probably start to gather some of the content, the type, or the images that you want to start plugging into this, because that's going to be a big part of our homework for next week. Okay, so so think about that a little bit. I think I'm going to talk about images. We'll actually then talk about styling our navigation. And then the week after that, I will show you guys how to start making those subpages. And all of a sudden, without even realizing it, you're going to have a fully functioning website. So we're getting there. You know, again, these baby steps really come together nicely over the next 2 weeks. Okay. All right, cool. Last call for questions. Any other questions you guys might have? All right, cool. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Actually, I don't think I can do that until I actually end the meeting, but we'll end up wrapping up, ending the meeting. I'll let this process. That was a good hour and a half that I recorded. So it'll take a good 20-30 minutes for Zoom to compress this, and then probably a good 20 minutes for me to get uploaded. But the walkthrough video is already up on YouTube, so you can certainly jump into that for part 4 of Project 1. As always, if you guys need anything from me over the course of the week, reach out to me via email. If you have a coding question, please make sure that you zip a copy of your root folder and just attach that, and I can get right into that code then, make comments, and I'll get right back to you. Okay. All right, guys, we'll have a fantastic week, and I will see you all back here next Wednesday afternoon.
All right. Have a good week.
Bye.
Have a good day.
All right, guys, you as well.